Today's the second episode with Ruth Van Reken, and we suggest you go back and listen to these in order. But Ruth Van Reken, of course, is the author of Third Culture Kids, and we are so excited to have her here. She has been speaking, teaching, lecturing, researching, and extensively speaking about globally mobile families and third culture kids for decades. And so please welcome Ruth Van Reken. The next question we had was, a lot of us are still a little triggered by that, what I call the dreaded question, the WAYF question, where are you from question. And I see people who don't even have a complex international life struggling with that question now. So I'm wondering, how do you recommend that anybody who is asked that question, who has a global background, whether they're an elder expat or a TCK or someone who's lived overseas, how do you recommend that we navigate the challenge of answering that question in a way that is graceful and creates a relationship rather than shutting down the possibilities?
Of course, that's a good question. I can't answer for everybody. I think everybody has their different ways. I think first we have to recognize, in the States at least, it's a social question.
Yeah.
It's the way people are trying to establish relationships, because it's like, well, I don't know anything about you, but if I can find a hook here, we can maybe find something to talk about while we've got shrimp on our platter and standing at a cocktail party or something, where you just hope somebody else wants to talk to you. I think that what I've learned, I had to, when I came back to the States and when they said, where are you from? I said, Nigeria. That was not a good answer. So parents should help their kids think before they go someplace, what's the answer you want to give? Because that just set up my being weird, and that set up lots of things. But then if I said I was from Chicago, it didn't feel very, whatever. So I kind of learned to say that I'm from Chicago based on the polite thing. Then we moved to Indianapolis, and I went to a conference just a couple months after we moved here. And somebody said, where are you from? I thought, oh, goodness me. Now I got to think about that again. And I found the perfect answer. I said, I came from Indianapolis, or I say I'm living in Indianapolis. Most of the times people don't say one more word. Oh, that's fine. Now, if you said that to me, I would think you didn't answer my question. You told me where you're living. You did not answer my question. So I would ask you the next question. Where did you live before that?
Yeah.
Because there's always an answer. And that's how I find, my husband says, how do you find people all over the place? I said, when they can't answer where you're from, or they give me funny answers.
Exactly.
So you can choose yours. I think it's good to have sort of that basic answer, because most people really didn't ask you your whole life story when they met you. They just wanted to start a conversation. But if you're listening, and you ask them back, where are you from, and see what they say, because sometimes you get some really interesting questions or answers. But I think
I always answer it with another question now. I always answer it with, can you tell me more about the question? And are you asking me where I was born? Because they pick up a weird accent sometimes. Or are you asking me where I just moved from? And that immediately opens up a conversation where there's more sort of to swim around in.
I think that's I've never tried that, but I think the fact that you said you have an accent, when people ask somebody with an accent, or if I see somebody that I think is African, and I say, where are you from? I really want to know where they're from, because, I might have some connections. But so that's a really good one with that, because I think that's where you might say, well, I'm from Mexico or something. And they say, well, where are you really from? And that question of where are you really from is a hard
Yes.
one for a lot of people because it makes them feel very othered.
Yes.
Like I'm not seeing you
Mhm.
as, where you say you're from, but I'm seeing you as an other. So
Mhm.
I think that's a great thing that you're doing, Doreen. You can make it a fun question. I mean, I think more and more people are doing that because why are we so intimidated by that? Why do we
Exactly.
feel so threatened? I mean,
Mm.
because we can't explain it. Well,
Mm.
lots of places anyway. How do you do it, Megan?
Well,
What do you
I was
say?
going to comment that reason why sometimes I feel uncomfortable is because it can shut down a conversation in a way where then they want to know then all the places, and then I feel like I've monopolized a lot of the time. Found that out, real quick because then it maybe alienates then connection of, well, how in the world am I supposed to understand and relate to you? And what's the next question? Or I think TCKs can become the biggest personality in a room real quick. And um, some want that. Some crave that because they want to uh, tell their larger than life stories that are larger in life in that context, but to them it's a normal, Tuesday in South Africa going to safari with a monkey eating a chip out of your hand, like that's I think the complexity sometimes with TCKs is we want to be known, like you said, and also know that you have time to tell your story, that we
Mm.
sometimes live in this faulty mindset of we only have 2 years, 3 years to tell our story, when in reality, now, even with virtual ways to communicate and stay in touch, we have a lifetime to stay in touch and to share our story. So I think there's less pressure now with that added way of communicating. But also, I think where you from in a TCK way, I might take this in a different direction, is can be a privileged question. And when we're thinking about expanding into cross-cultural kid experiences, sometimes that's not part of the high mobility experience. And yet there's that shared experience of we have been crossing cultures. And so what's another question to ask of, okay, I haven't moved nearly as much as maybe a TCK has, but let's talk about how we experience different values or education systems, things like that. So I wonder, how can we do a better job of asking more questions?
Well, you bring up a good point. If I'm in a TTK gathering, we easily say, where are you from? Just as this social question. And then you look at each other and you think, okay, that was the wrong question. Where were you
Exactly.
born? Where'd you grow up? I mean,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
switch the question. But I
Yes.
think, again, like you said, Megan, I think you bring a good point. We can monopolize, and it can be part of, I don't want to say our showing off, but trying to establish something, but it can be a little off-putting to people who don't know
Yeah.
what to do. When we moved here to Indianapolis, we'd been in Chicago for a year. My kids were in high school, and one said, Mom, we're from Chicago now. We are not from Liberia. And they took down all my African stuff that I had just put up and put up
Oh.
pictures from Target because they said, we are from Chicago. And I realized they didn't want to have their friends come over and see all this weird stuff that I had waited my whole life to put up on my walls.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's okay. But because I had done that in high school
You understood.
in Africa, and I graduated, after 4 years, and the guy sitting next to me for the 4 years, somehow it came up and he said, you're kidding. And he'd been sitting by me for 4 years and in homeroom and never knew because I made it my secret, so that I wouldn't be different. But that's fine, except you've lopped off half your life. So how do you not use it as a badge or something? But I think the other thing is we become more comfortable, maybe in a globalizing world, and more people are doing it. We don't have to say it right away. When I moved here just before COVID to a HOA community, a condo community, and when they had their first luncheon after things loosened up, they said, "Well, everybody tell your life story." And I realized I really didn't want to tell mine yet. Like you said, for the time, I thought they'll have time, but if I really tell them, most of them grew up in Indiana, and they all had really good stories. But if I told them mine, it would be so different. They would think that I could be their friend. I mean, that's how I felt. I don't know. I thought, well, I live here, but it doesn't have to come out all the first day. So that's a really good point, Megan.
And I find a way that I always find a question to ask at the end of the answer. So if I say, well, I was born in Scotland, now I live in Mexico, and there was several other countries or places in between.
Good job.
And then I always dive into the next question because I'm always like, okay. So, and if I refer to, oh, well, it was I went on a tour of the Middle East and followed my husband and everything. Have you ever lived in these places? Because I'm always about, trying to find the connection. And it's not answering the question. It's what does that answer lead me to? What is the next question that I can ask? And I think that that's a good way to connect to people and let them know that we're interested in connection.
Yes.
Not the details. I'm more interested in the connection than the details.
Well, I think that's brilliant, Doreen, because we forget sometimes other people have stories.
They all have stories. Yeah.
And they all are interesting if you can get them to tell it. And most people seem to be surprised if you ask them about their story.
Yeah.
Because it seems that they don't ask too often, or, and we think, why don't people ask us more? But I think that's a beautiful next step too, between not having to give it all, like you said, Megan, and asking back. It does engage people, and you hear their story and you find out about their lives and maybe life where you haven't lived before. So,
and I think that's sorry, Megan, you were talking about TCK demographics and being in a TCK room. I was thinking about the difference in the experience here of being in a more gentrified, older community where a lot of people are older. And so I think that generationally, this is also part of the belonging. And because I think maybe younger generations, I don't know if I'm asking actually, is this true for you that they're kind of like, get to the point, be more pointed. We don't really want to hear all your crazy stories, old lady. But that's the way I feel. And here it's a little bit different because people are bringing 5, 6, 7 decades to the table and have not had any training in how to articulate those stories well. So I'm just wondering, is that part of this conversation?
Yeah, you bring up a good point with generational perhaps differences, but also I'm thinking, and Ruth, you were talking about how it's a social question too when you're getting to know someone. And then also recently, having moved to a new city, people want to know what you do for work. And so that's also another element of like, well, I did work and live overseas, but how much of that do I share? Like that was also not abnormal for me. I was like seeking to go work and live overseas intentionally. And so I think it just goes back to the fact that we all hold different roles. We show up in spaces differently, and that's okay. And sometimes I think that stresses TCKs out because they feel fragmented then, or perhaps feel like they're not being authentic. But in reality, if we think about it's all of these things, then yes, you're living your truth in this space well. So yeah, it just takes time to share all parts of who we are and what we've lived.
Yes, and I think we discount the time factor a lot frequently. We want it to happen faster because everything else in our technical lives is happening faster. So we want to go faster and get to know people faster. I'm certainly very guilty of that because I feel like, okay, if I'm going to live another 20 or 30 years in this little community, I got to. I'm on a bit of a hamster wheel a couple of times in trying to get to know people and who are my people, and it's just fascinating. Anyway, we might not keep that, Megan.
But I've just found out recently talking to some people that they don't like to be asked questions. They feel like and it's a TCK, but that the person's being too nosy. Why do they have any right to know about my life? And I wonder how many people I've offended being
Me
interested
too.
in their stories,
Mhm.
And so I guess the thing is there, if people aren't responding,
Mhm.
not to push, because like you said, Doreen, we tend to like to get to know people faster, or I don't know people before. I don't have a history. Like if you grew up in a town, you don't have to ask them the questions
Yeah.
because you know how the town works and you know all these things. And for us, I don't know you, so I have to ask who you are. And maybe, I've had my kids say, Mom, you really asked a lot of questions. And I thought, but they were so interesting, the answers, So
Yeah, mine too. My daughter still says that.
maybe we have to be a little more culturally sensitive sometimes than we know.
And culturally sensitive with inside all these generational conversations that we're having. Yeah. So another question we had was, what do you pinpoint are the top 2 or 3 unique strengths that third culture kids bring to their communities and their workplaces? What have you seen over the decades you've been working with this topic? What have you seen that is the, a couple of the unique strengths? I call them superpowers.
Well, I think, again, we have to say that every person is unique. So just because one person
Yes.
develops a certain thing from their background doesn't mean everybody does. But there's a really cool, brand new PhD research on adult TCKs in the workplace that just came out. I just got it from Jennifer Kuhn this week, and she'll be publishing it. Well, she said I can, share that she's done it, but I think she's going to be putting it out somewhere. And her question was, are companies using the cultural competence? First, what is the cultural competency of kids who grow up this way? And what are the linguistic skills that they have? And finding that, because in a certain way, many of us have a hidden identity. It's a hidden diversity in the sense that what is different about us is not seen, it's not visible. And so a lot of the skill sets that might be almost inherent to our growing up, or it happens so naturally we don't even think about it because we're knowing that you have to use your left hand in one place and it's okay not to use your left hand in another, and things like that. That particularly the cultural competency wasn't used a lot. The language skills, if I read her thing correctly here, the language skills, if they would find out, maybe they would ask somebody to come be a translator. And that most of them who were doing translation in that kind of way, it wasn't because they had gone to school and stuff. It was because of how they'd grown up, that they had learned these languages in their growing up years. So I think part of the information and spreading the word is that there are these skill sets in a globalizing world that are not probably being tapped. Now, in other ways, I think, there's the usual things we talk about, adaptability and all this, but, other people can be adaptable, but one of the things probably for many of us is realizing, well, it's not how it was. So even something as simple as how do you make peach pie from papaya? You know, that you don't have the same things that you had before, but you can figure it out. And so there's some great cooks and there's some great, wonderful things people make, you know. So I think that it doesn't just happen automatically, but there are a lot of things that become part of who we are. And even my father was once working between Nigerians and the people from his organization. And he said, I've got problems because I can always see both sides. And each side wants me to see only theirs. So when I found out he died before he knew about TCKs, but when I learned about TCKs, I thought that's what he was saying about being a bridge, that he could see both sides and he could try to represent to one side or the other that. And, you know, there's so many stories, I'm sure, Megan, that you've known him and Doreen, you've known him, where people can make that connection of explanation, like that person isn't really lying if he tells you he finished it. He wants to just please you, even if he didn't quite finish his job. And you're saying, well, you know, whatever. But I know, Megan, you have lots of stories from your background and your training. And you do too, Doreen. Why don't you guys share one or two? I'm putting you on the spot, I know, but I know that, I mean, you've done a lot of work in intercultural training.
One of the things that I see pretty consistently across the board is that the TCKs that I have been mostly in touch with there's an enthusiasm for the globe. There's an enthusiasm for geography. There's an enthusiasm for science. There's an enthusiasm for climate change. There's an enthusiasm for water projects. And, you know, from my husband, who's almost 80, Ruth, who is a TCK, to my daughter and, you know, the next generation that is coming along now, I just sense that this is a superpower that sometimes can just naturally lead them into their field of study because there's a real love, a real appreciation, a real holding the globe and the planet and the people and this experience of being human on this planet with awe and wonder.
Great point.
So that's just something that's kind of become, I'm paying more attention to.
And if I can say one thing that I think that what I realized when President Obama was running, I kept thinking, wow, this is, you know, great TCK. Why doesn't he talk more about his internationalness? And I came to realize that a lot of people in this country didn't think international was so good. And that was one of the first times it occurred to me how much I have my worldview from my experience like everybody else does.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
I couldn't understand how it wasn't the biggest thing that he put out about himself, you know. And I came to realize that it was sort of like me in high school. Maybe you don't want to talk about it too much because it's not just scary, but it's a different worldview. And,
Yes.
you know, when he first picked his cabinets, of many of the people he chose were third culture kids.
Yes.
And in time, I began to realize that there was, and I'm not trying to talk political here, I'm just saying that there was a certain disconnect because they, as TCKs, perhaps didn't understand how the farmers were feeling because they hadn't been there. And the farmers weren't understanding how they were feeling. And as the world is, you know, moving on since then, part of our problem, I think, right now is we have to understand we see things from our perspective and other people do too. And so there's more fractionating because people, the biggest challenge we have is finding out not only belonging, but belonging to ourselves. Who are we? I mean, individually, so that I don't have to prove myself by saying who I'm not. And I think there's a lot of, well, I'm not you. And we can do that as kids who grew up internationally. Well, I'm not a monocultural. Well, good for me. But, that can be just as proud as anything else. So how do we define ourselves both by our experience, by our life, but not be in an anti stance to what I'm not? Because that could creep in pretty easily for all of us.
Yes.
And I don't know how I got on that. Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, I think that really dovetails into what we wanted to draw out too, is, creating a sense of home and belonging as adults. And that's really naming then what's our worldview, what are the lenses in which we see the world, and being okay with that. And also I think leaning into culturally code switching is also a unique skill. Is there something else, Ruth, you would add that you've found? I mean, you've moved so much too, and lived in so many different spaces. What's been a way you've created home and a sense of belonging?
Again, we're back to the basic things. Wherever I am, there are people. And I think the greatest gift of my life has been knowing people from many cultures, many languages, many groups, and being able to be friends with them. We don't share all the details of our culture, but we can share enjoying that food together. We can share learning about each other's lives because they're people, they're in that same likeness that I am. And I honestly think that the gift of all of them that I would say from my life is that I have plain outright enjoyed meeting people who are from so many backgrounds and have such overt differences, but we can connect because we're all people. And we can connect on these essential things of our humanity and respecting each other and listening to each other. And I don't know, that to me is just one of my bigger joys, is that I have experienced culture and people across the board. And that does make it hard for me to understand why people can be so rejecting of somebody else who isn't like them. And I have to try and understand that they didn't grow up like I did. They maybe grew up more in one place where they were taught to fear the others and things. And I'm not putting myself up as some big thing. I'm just saying that's been fun for me. It's been a wonder. It's been a joy, and it makes my life so rich. But I have to, if I say forgive or not be superior in my own heart to people who didn't grow up that way and find comfort just being in their house with people like them and try to understand that too.
Yeah, and that's really, I think, focusing on belonging to the level of we're human. We belong to the human race, because sometimes that's where I find I have to go all the way back to that. It was someone who is a monocultural person and hasn't lived the kind of lifestyle that I, let's face it, have enjoyed privilege to live. And so I find connecting at some sort of a human level, I get a kick out of that, and I get a kick out of the novelty of living in a city where some of the traditions and the celebrations we have in the city I'm living in are, we have like 370 pageants and celebrations a year. And the level of positivity and the level of energy that people put into these parades and these pilgrimages and the death and dying and the birth that goes along with it, and everything that they do with such intention. And a lot of this has come from the indigenous people, because we're on Chichimeca and Otomi land here. And so we have a mixture of the indigenous, and of course we have the Catholic faith. So I call it voodoo Catholicism, and it's wonderfully mixed up to the point where most of us are pretty curious and excited. Like you said, Ruth, you have a very high level of curiosity. And I am so excited to live in a place where the people who live here, who are from here, are curious and interested and willing to share their traditions with us in a way that has been very different from anywhere I've ever lived.
Let's
So
see.
I think I think it's important for us all try to, connect to the very, very human level.
I agree.
Yeah. Megan, you want to go to the next question?
Yeah, I think we're gonna wrap it up a bit with the, gathering the wisdom of Ruth Van Reken. What advice would you give to parents raising third culture kids about fostering their sense of identity, and how would that also interface with belonging?
I think that we also have to realize even how we share absolute likeness as humans, we also share absolute uniqueness.
Mm-hmm.
And at the basic level, every kid who's born has certain gifts and certain tendencies that'll be shaped by culture. But for parents, I would say two things. First, you want to establish a very strong sense of your family belonging. And I know there's many kinds of families, and it's not always as possible as it might be, but whatever your family is, making family traditions that are portable so that wherever you go, this is who we are. Helping kids when they get to the next place, explore that place, that becomes part of your family tradition as we live together in this place and we found it interesting. But also look for what are those unique gifts your child has. And like I said, mine that transcends culture, and your children's unique gifts will transcend culture. Mine is a mind that thinks in questions. So no matter where I go, I think in questions, whatever culture I'm in. But some kids, right from the beginning, you watch them. I've got a whole bunch of grandkids now, and there were two in one family. And when they played with the Thomas the Train track things, the older kid would have to try every piece, and he'd have to go this way and that way, and he never knew what he was doing. The younger one would look at a piece on the floor, and he could transfer in his mind that piece is the one I need for that. And I watched that, and I thought, isn't this a wonder that this kid already has that spatial connection, and this one doesn't. But the one who didn't have the spatial connection could go to the piano and sound out tunes at two. So there's something when your child is growing, they're not you. That's another wonder. I had a daughter that was much more artistic than I ever guessed because I'm so non-artistic. She won some prizes in high school in her art class, and I thought, I never knew that. I guess I should have been developing that. And I thought back and I thought, oh, somebody did teach her how to paint birds once, and she did a good job. I should have been paying attention, So what is it that your child is unique in their uniqueness? And in the cross-cultural lifestyle, there's a lot of opportunities maybe for a new way to explore that, because like I say, it's shaped by culture. And so if they're mechanical, and when we were in Liberia or Kenya, a lot of the people are taking tin cans and making the original recycling. They're making them into thumb pianos, or they're making them into something. Well, maybe your kid could go watch them. My dad said he learned to do furniture by going to the furniture makers in Iran when he was a child. So there's a lot of things we can explore together with our kids. But when you see them with these things that maybe if you were in one place, one of the challenges is, depending on what kind of gift they have, they may not be able to be continuously trained. Like I always thought I would have been a great pianist if didn't have a folding organ. So when I went to Liberia, I made sure I took a piano so my kids could take piano lessons, but they still didn't have like Suzuki at 4, and Suzuki at 2. And so do the best you can to give them the opportunities for what they have. But sometimes people have to stretch a little bit. If there's like a say a kid's doing great in gymnastics, and you move someplace that they don't have gymnastics. Maybe there's a person who can teach them, but be looking for that child. In my family, I see that, and developing those things the best way you can. But above all, remember the kid's a kid. All the things kids need. They need security, they need love, they need wisdom. And one of the other things we all need as humans is choice. And one of the problems for some kids who grew up this way is they feel they never had a choice. They just got moved willy-nilly and nobody ever asked them, and they can become very bitter. Well, they may not have a choice about being moved per se, but first off, as we know about transition, building the raft, preparing them and saying goodbye and all that stuff. But also as you're leaving and as you're moving, what are the choices you can give them in the non-choices? And some people, okay, here's a box, you get to keep whatever your things are, so they'll take those. And asking kids so that they don't feel totally choiceless and that they have no agency in their lives, because that is one of the big challenges I've seen with adults. They've given up making choices that they could make because it's kind of like there's no use to make a choice. It's never going to work anyway. So those are kind of things I think that developing awareness of who they are as a person, so that you're, both the basics, what they need of love and relationship and all that. But then that uniqueness, and sometimes that's a little more challenging. And if you have a child that has learning disabilities or something, there are places you can get help so that you can help that child in their need to develop all about who they are as best you can. Anyway, that's what I think.
Wonderful wisdom. Wonderful wisdom from the mouth of Ruth Van Reken. That's terrific. I think everybody, I hope you listeners will have picked up on something that really applies. I'd just like to add, before Megan closes and says goodbye, a quote from Mother Teresa. And she said something about, if we have no peace, it's because we have lost or we have forgotten that we belong to each other. And I would like to leave that as a parting thought. And Megan, is there something you would like to leave us with today?
I would love to have Ruth with the closing word of what would be a word that you would describe your home as?
They call us Hotel Van Reken.
Right.
For some reason, we have always enjoyed welcoming the strangers and the pilgrims.
Yes.
And
yeah,
my home isn't always spotless. I had to learn about that. It was okay. But everybody who comes, I really think we enjoy. There's so much joy in sitting at the table with people. And when we have our grandkids here, it's a big, we have very strong tradition about how we do what we call pretend Christmas 2 days after Thanksgiving, so everybody can go to their other grandparents. And it's become absolutely essential for the kids and the family. But we've always enjoyed the strangers and the pilgrims too, because somehow our house has always been where people are traveling through and they need a place to stay. And it is a joy, and it's part of belonging, because when people also are in your home, you feel like you belong to them and they feel more like they belong to you. But I was going to say one other thing. We maybe don't feel belonging to every single person, because the world's a big place and that doesn't always happen. But concentrate on the ones that you do belong to, and keep developing those relationships, and adding to them. Because I do think the other thing is that as we care for each other and we bring each other people in who didn't know they had a place of belonging, maybe that's what it is, Megan. I want people to come in and have a place to rest their souls and to feel at home and to belong,
Yes.
even for those few minutes.
Yeah. Thank you for hosting me, Ruth, in your home. And Doreen, thank you for hosting me also. And
A long time ago.
yeah, both of you are welcome to my home
Oh,
anytime.
gotta do it again. You both have to come to San Miguel.
Never been to Mexico.
Oh, wow.
In all the travels I've done, I've never been there.
Well, you are most welcome here. Mi casa, su casa, and we have a casita downstairs anytime. We love to have you
Thank you.
together or individually. And thank you so much for this very special conversation, Ruth. I am very honored and very excited about the contributions that you continue to make every minute of every day with all of your work. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I couldn't spread the word that I care about so much if people like you weren't doing what you're doing. So I appreciate that very much. And I know that all of your other guests will have even more wisdom. So I appreciate both of you and what you're doing and spreading the word and helping people to know they're not alone in this world, because it's a lonely world for many. And every time we feel a little connection, we grow a bit more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.